I'm thinking about gender and the various agendas that revolve around gender and sexuality and feminism and whatever its male equivalent might be. And I'm probably snipping into a real fucking hornet's nest here actually, but I'll give it a go anyway, because this is really prompted by a comment that I wish I could remember this person's name, I'm really sorry. This person used to have a channel called Dinah Boston, now it's something else. And in my mind I've got the word stale panini, but that's not it, it's something like that. I apologise not getting that quite right. But anyway, she left a comment on a video I made recently, kind of commenting on the fact that I'd used the word gonads to, the idea that I was making an appeal to biological determinism, kind of. And I responded, just before I left today actually to go on this walk, to say that I was using the words metaphorically, and it was metaphorical gonads that I was alluding to. That's the thing, what does it mean to have metaphorical gonads? What can that possibly mean? And I suppose where that's leading me to think about is several things. Firstly, the difference between sex, sexuality and gender, and then how gender manifests itself and is made available in the world, and then what falls out of that in terms of behaviours and power structures. I can't remember the name of the theorist I'm citing here, I'm sorry, but certainly one of the major ways of talking about gender identity is in terms of sex, sexuality and gender, and that distinction is that, you know, sex, which is your biological form, which is generally male and female, but there are variations, of course. That's one component, just the biology of your body. The second is sexuality or sexual orientation, which might be anywhere in the gay, straight, bisexual kind of network, that whole matrix of behaviour, falling out of a kind of polymorphously perverse infancy. And then the third aspect is gender, and gender is socially constructed, and it's the performance that we give appropriate, which we might or might not feel is appropriate to our sex and our sexuality. And those three components, sex, sexuality and gender, whilst we might kind of normalise them and say them together, are actually three different components and can exist in any combination. So it's perfectly possible to be sexed biologically male, to have a sexuality which is to be homosexual, which you might just kind of heteronormatively talk about as female. I personally wouldn't, but some people might. And you might have a gender which is anywhere from female to male or something else entirely, because the gender is a performance bit. Okay, it's a bit of a long introduction really, but the bit I'm interested in is this last bit, which is about gender. Because as I said before, gender is socially constructed. There's nothing in your body that tells you how to cross your legs and what colour to wear or any of those kind of things. All those things come out of social constructions, and they're ultimately performatives. And here I'm borrowing from Judith Butler, who in turn is borrowing from Austin, talking about performativity. And what she says is that gender is performative, which doesn't mean to say that gender is fake. She doesn't mean to say that gender is a performance in the way that, you know, theatrical performances are performances. It doesn't mean that there you are as an authentically gendered human being and you kind of put on a mask and pretend to be a different gender. That's not what she means. She says that gender only exists in its performance. Sex is predetermined, of course, your biology is what it is. Your sexuality is in all likelihood predetermined, but your gender is something that you do. It's a performance that you put on, probably adopting one of the scripts made available to you by the culture you're in. So how does that relate to metaphorical gonads? Well, I suppose what I'm thinking of there is that, you know, when we adopt a gender, when we perform these scripts and gender ourselves performatively, we're effectively we're kind of dressing ourselves up in a body of some kind, or we're making allusions to a metaphorical body of some kind. And because it is a sexualized body, we use terms like, well, terms associated with the genitalia particularly, kind of identify us with those, and testicles and penises and vaginas and all that kind of stuff is the lexicon of that performance, I think. So if we're trying to signify a certain kind of behaviour, we might say it's ballsy, or we might talk about someone growing a pair if we want them to act in a certain way, i.e. if we want them to perform a certain kind of style, or perform a certain script. So that little use of that metaphor, which is probably synecdoche rather than metaphor, is a signifier for a whole set of performances that come out of that. One of the things that's interesting to me about that is about how these performances become recognised. Because a lot of these times, these performances that we give off as our genders are just invisible. Because we don't deconstruct it into those three components that I mentioned. We just assume that they're all kind of intimately connected, they're all the same thing. We don't recognise that we're performing it, and we don't see performances in other people normally. I say normally because I think sometimes we do. And when we do see a performance, or when we do recognise performances that have taken place in our culture but no longer tend to take place, and they become recognisable, there's all kinds of freedoms, I think, open up at that point. And the one I'm thinking of, well, I'm thinking of two actually, but the one I'm thinking of, a female one I'm thinking of, is a performance that's a bit like the gamin in French New Wave films, that kind of coquettishness, flirtatious coquettishness, which up until about 20-25 years ago was terribly popular. You couldn't watch a TV show without there being some kind of slightly infantilized woman on there, kind of being coy and sheepish and coquettish, but flirtatious at the same time, and seeming to need rescuing the whole time. That was a very popular performance, but it was completely invisible as a performance 25 years ago. I remember watching shows. There was a show on British TV called, Felicity Kendall was in it. It was a show about The Good Life, it was called. A show about a couple trying to be self-sufficient and growing their own food and stuff. But the heroine on that, Felicity Kendall, was terribly coquettish. She was like a child, but very attractive to, considered to be very attractive to men. And it was a completely invisible performance. It looked like an authentic way of women to behave. But when you look at those old reruns of The Good Life, or you see footage of films around that age, a lot of the films made in the late 1960s were like this. You think, why is that woman behaving in such a weird way? Why is she behaving like an 11-year-old? And if you see a woman behaving in that way nowadays, it just looks foolish, I think. Maybe it's just me, but it just looks ridiculous. Think, why is that woman behaving so strangely? It's very, very obvious that you're in the presence of a performance, not in the presence of an authentic, whatever that means. It doesn't have that kind of transparency of the familiar gender performances that we're perhaps used to. And I think, although I may be wrong here, but I think the same kind of process, the same kind of making visible of a performance might be taking place with what are referred to as gonad metaphor performances. The male-orientated performance which centres itself around a particular display of testicles and a particular kind of male genital performance. Sometimes, I'll tell you where I've seen it most recently. There's a show on TV in Britain, but I'm pretty sure it's been franchised around the world, called Dragon's Den. It's a kind of X Factor, American Idol show for entrepreneurs, where they have a group of rich and powerful business people and acting as a panel of judges, and then you have some poor pleb coming up there and trying to sell them their good idea and basically taken apart. If you look at that, I think it's a fantastic example, because the people on the panel there, Duncan Bannatyne and Theo Paphitis and these other guys who've made a fortune, basically they're involved in this huge dick waving contest. It's all about waving a huge dick around, and it's very, very visible once you get it, once you see what's happening. And the fact that sometimes there are women on the panel as well, also waving metaphorical dicks about and getting their metaphorical gonads out for to compare sizes with the guy sitting next to them, it just makes it more evident in a way. It's the performance, it's the kind of Butlerian performance of gender. But as I said, the fact that it's becoming visible gives it a kind of freedom, I think. The fact that it isn't, I guess you would say, hegemonically embedded within the culture to such an extent that it becomes invisible. It's very obvious when some guy's doing that, or some woman is doing that, I think. But anyway, I don't know where that's going really. Yeah, metaphorical gonads. Yeah.